The McCann family arrived in the coastal town of Praia da Luz, Portugal, on April 28, 2007. It was meant to be a peaceful retreat, sunshine, sand, and quiet evenings with friends. Kate and Gerry McCann, both British doctors, had brought their 3 young children. Madeleine, their eldest at just 3 years old, and twins, Sean and Amelie. They weren't alone. The trip was organized with a group of close friends, 3 other couples, many of them also medical professionals, along with their children. In total, 9 adults and 8 children. They stayed in apartments at the Ocean Club Resort, a cluster of whitewashed holiday flats near the beach. The McCanns were in apartment 5A, a ground floor flat with a small patio that backed onto a pedestrian walkway. During the day, the routine was relaxed and familiar. The children were dropped off at the resort's kids club. The adults spent their mornings by the pool, went sailing, played tennis. In the afternoons, the families gathered together. Evenings were reserved for dinner and wine at the Tapas bar, just a short walk away from their rooms. The McCanns and their friends chose to dine together each night, without the children. Instead of hiring a babysitter or using the resort's childcare services, they made an unusual arrangement. Each couple would check on their kids in intervals throughout dinner, a sort of informal rotation system. On the surface, everything seemed idyllic. But even in those early days, there were warning signs. The McCanns were highly structured, even clinical, in how they approached their holiday. Observers later described their behavior as distant, unusually calm for parents of toddlers. And there were quiet murmurings, even among those close to them, about the risks of leaving small children alone in unlocked apartments while the adults shared meals just out of sight. Still, no one could have imagined what would happen next. In just a few days, that peaceful Portuguese resort would become the epicenter of one of the most notorious missing child cases in history. And questions about what really happened on that holiday would ripple across the world. It was Thursday, May 3rd, 2007, the 5th night of the McCann's holiday. The day had been typical. Madeleine spent the morning at the Ocean Club's creche, playing and painting. In the afternoon, the family enjoyed time by the pool. There's a now famous photograph from that day, Madeleine smiling, sitting beside her father and sister. Some believe it was the last picture ever taken of her. That evening, around 8:30 p.m., Kate and Gerry McCann put their 3 children to bed in apartment 5A. Madeleine, in pink pajamas with Eeyore on the front, was laid in her bed beside the window. The twins slept in travel cots nearby. The parents left the patio door slightly open as they joined their friends at the Tapas bar, about 50 meters away, close enough to hear if a child cried, they claimed. They began their usual rotation system of checks. At 9:05 p.m., Gerry went back to the apartment. He would later say he saw all 3 children asleep. Oddly, he mentioned the door was open, wider than before, which struck him as strange. Still, he closed it again and returned to dinner. At 9:15 p.m., a friend, Jane Tanner, left the table to check on her own daughter. On her way, she claimed to have seen a man carrying a child away from the McCann apartment. She said the child had bare legs and bare feet and wore light-colored pajamas. At the time, she thought little of it. At 10 p.m., Kate went to check on the children. The moment she entered the apartment, everything changed. She would later say that the bedroom door was blown wide open and the window was open, shutters raised. Madeleine's bed was empty. She screamed, "Madeleine's gone! Someone's taken her!" Chaos erupted. Friends ran through the resort, staff were alerted, guests were woken. But crucial time had already been lost. The Portuguese police were notified, but the initial response was slow and disorganized. There was no immediate lockdown of the resort, no border checks. The apartment wasn't treated as a crime scene until much later. In the confusion, people had entered and exited the apartment multiple times. Evidence, if there was any, may have already been destroyed. Within hours, the peaceful resort of Praia da Luz transformed into something far darker. Panic, suspicion, and one unshakable question: how does a child disappear from her bed without a trace in a room shared with her siblings while her parents dine just steps away? The disappearance of a child is always tragic, but when it happens on foreign soil to a photogenic family of British doctors, the story catches fire. By morning, May 4th, Praia da Luz was swarming with concern and confusion. Holidaymakers gave statements. Local police, the Policia Judiciaria, interviewed staff. Leaflets were printed. But the investigation had already faltered. There was no official cordon, no forensic containment of the McCann's apartment. Vital hours had slipped away. The media caught wind almost immediately. British tabloids were on the ground within 24 hours. Headlines cried out, "Find Madeleine." Photos of the missing toddler, wide-eyed, blonde, innocent, were everywhere. But not everyone was comfortable with the way things unfolded. By May 5th, the McCanns had hired a media consultant. A bold move, some said premature. A family friend and government PR advisor named Alex Woolfall flew out to help manage their image. This wasn't just a missing child case now, it was a media campaign. Kate and Gerry began giving statements, holding hands at press conferences. They appeared in front of the world, composed, articulate, grief-stricken, but calm. Too calm, some would later argue. The public was split, many sympathized. The McCanns were intelligent, respected professionals, devastated parents in an unimaginable nightmare. But others began to whisper. Why hadn't they used the resort's babysitting service? Why leave 3 young children alone? Why did their story seem rehearsed? As the days passed, their composure became a point of suspicion. Kate, especially, was criticized for appearing cold or detached. Her refusal to cry publicly became fuel for tabloid speculation. And yet, behind the cameras, the campaign expanded. The McCanns launched the Find Madeleine Fund, hired lawyers, built a website. British politicians, including Prime Minister Gordon Brown, expressed public support. Donations poured in. Posters went up across Europe. Pope Benedict XVI met them in Vatican City. They were no longer just parents, they were international figures. But behind the scenes, the Portuguese police were beginning to ask difficult questions. Their notes revealed early doubts. Was this really an abduction, or had something else happened that night? The story the McCanns told seemed airtight, but that was part of the problem. There were no fingerprints on the bedroom window, no signs of forced entry, no screams, no witnesses, apart from Jane Tanner's brief sighting of a man with a child, which police quietly doubted. If it wasn't an intruder, then who? As the McCanns stepped further into the spotlight, suspicion quietly began to turn inward. In the days following Madeleine's disappearance, a strange calm seemed to settle over Kate and Gerry McCann. While investigators struggled to find leads and volunteers combed the surrounding areas, the McCanns resumed parts of their daily routine, one that, to many observers, felt at odds with the emotional state of parents who had just lost a child. They started going for runs. Every morning, Kate would jog along the same quiet roads near Praia da Luz. Gerry would sometimes join her. To those around them, it was jarring. The image of grieving parents pacing through the Portuguese heat, clad in gym clothes, was difficult to reconcile with the severity of what had just occurred. Defenders said they were trying to stay sane, to keep structure during a nightmare. Critics were less forgiving. They asked, what parents go jogging just days after their child disappears? Others noticed more strange behavior. Kate was often seen clutching Madeleine's soft toy, Cuddle Cat, but always neatly cleaned and pressed, not worn or weathered. Police noted that she washed it regularly, even though it could have held crucial forensic evidence. At the same time, the McCanns were meeting with high-level diplomats, giving press interviews, and organizing media strategies. They were already preparing a long-term campaign, yet investigators felt they weren't fully cooperating with the search itself. When Portuguese police asked the McCanns to return to the crime scene for a reconstruction, they refused. They were also hesitant to answer certain direct questions, and in a particularly controversial moment, both parents declined to take polygraph tests. That refusal became a flashpoint. To many in the public, it was simple. If you have nothing to hide, why not take the test? But the McCann's legal team insisted lie detectors were unreliable and inadmissible. They maintained their innocence and refused to be drawn into what they considered a police smear campaign. Still, the optics were damaging. While the McCanns jogged, briefed the press, and consulted PR advisors, Portuguese authorities and British public opinion began to shift. The once sympathetic image of grieving parents now seemed more controlled, more curated. Gerry wrote in his personal blog, "Kate and I managed a run together. It helps to clear the head." But for those watching closely, it didn't clear much at all. If anything, it raised a deeper question. Were the McCanns trying to stay sane in the face of tragedy, or trying to stay ahead of something else? As public interest in the case exploded, so did the pressure on Kate and Gerry McCann. The Portuguese police had hit a wall. There were no ransom demands, no credible sightings, no forensic evidence of an abduction. So attention turned inward, toward the people closest to Madeleine. The investigators had questions, and they wanted answers. In early interviews, both parents cooperated, but over time that cooperation became more selective. Tensions between the McCanns and the Polícia Judiciária began to surface. The police believed they were being stonewalled. And then came the issue of the lie detector tests. The McCanns were asked directly if they would agree to take a polygraph. The request wasn't formal, and it wasn't required, but it was important. It was symbolic, a way to either eliminate suspicion or escalate it. They refused. The response from their legal team was swift and clear. Lie detectors are not scientifically reliable. They can be misread. They're inadmissible in court. Taking one, they argued, would lend credibility to a process that was fundamentally flawed. But the public didn't see it that way. Tabloids seized on it. What are they hiding? TV panels debated it endlessly. Internet forums lit up. Why not just take the test? What harm could it do? Unless there was something to fear. The refusal cast a shadow that still lingers today. And there was more. Police had already grown frustrated with Kate McCann in particular. She refused to answer 48 questions during a critical police interview in September 2007. Questions like, did you search inside the wardrobe in the bedroom? Did you sedate your children? Did you have any involvement in Madeleine's disappearance? To every one, she simply replied, no comment. Only one question got an answer. Are you aware that in not answering the questions, you are jeopardizing the investigation, which seeks to discover what happened to your daughter? Kate said, yes, if that's what the investigation thinks. It was a chilling moment. Investigators were stunned. To them, it seemed defensive, obstructive, perhaps even telling. The McCanns maintained that they had been advised not to answer by their Portuguese lawyer, who believed the police were setting a trap. They insisted they were protecting themselves from wrongful suspicion. But for many, it was yet another red flag. The parents of a missing child had just refused to help an investigation in the most basic way. No lie detector, no full interview, no reconstruction. In the court of public opinion, they were losing trust fast. And for detectives who were already skeptical, the message was clear. This wasn't just a grieving family. This was a family hiding behind legal walls. By mid-2007, the Portuguese investigation into Madeleine McCann's disappearance had stalled. No credible suspects, no eyewitnesses, no physical evidence of an intruder. So when British sniffer dogs were brought in, the detectives were hopeful. Two specially trained Springer Spaniels, Eddie and Keela, arrived in Praia da Luz with their handler, Martin Grime, a veteran from South Yorkshire Police. These weren't ordinary dogs. Eddie was trained to detect the scent of human cadavers. Keela was trained to locate traces of human blood. They began their work in August 2007, nearly 3 months after Madeleine vanished, and what they found changed the direction of the investigation. The first target was the McCann's holiday flat. The dogs were brought in one at a time, without handlers or police giving them any cues. Eddie, the cadaver dog, alerted in multiple locations: behind the living room sofa, inside the wardrobe in the main bedroom, near the veranda. Keela, the blood detection dog, also signaled behind the sofa. To many observers, this was the first tangible breakthrough. The dogs had reacted only in apartment 5A. None of the other holiday apartments, including those used by friends, showed any signs. Then came the most unsettling moment of all. In late May, almost a month after the disappearance, the McCanns had rented a silver Renault Scenic. Investigators asked the dogs to examine it. Eddie again alerted to the scent of a cadaver, specifically near the boot. Keela signaled for blood on the car key and inside the trunk lining. This raised a terrifying possibility. Could Madeleine have died in the apartment? And could her body have been moved in that car weeks later? Further testing was ordered. Samples were collected from the vehicle and the apartment. The Forensic Science Service in Birmingham conducted DNA analysis. Early reports suggested a partial DNA match to Madeleine was found in the car. But the sample was small, degraded, and controversial. Later interpretations suggested it could not conclusively be tied to her. The science was not strong enough to confirm guilt, but not weak enough to rule it out. Kate and Gerry were furious. They insisted the dogs were unreliable and the findings were being twisted. But for the Polizia Giudiziaria, the case had shifted. They no longer believed they were chasing an abductor. They began to suspect something far darker, that Madeleine had died in the apartment, and the abduction had been staged as a cover-up. On September 7, 2007, the McCanns were officially declared arguidos, formal suspects in their daughter's disappearance. Public sympathy fractured. British headlines turned. What once seemed unthinkable was now being openly discussed. Did Madeleine McCann die that night, and were her parents hiding the truth all along? By September 2007, the mood in Praia da Luz and across Europe had changed. In the first weeks, Kate and Gerry McCann were seen as victims of a monstrous crime. But now, months later, the media that once held candlelight vigils for Madeleine had begun to ask a different question. What if this wasn't an abduction at all? The suspicions began quietly, inside the Portuguese investigation. Behind closed doors, detectives had grown increasingly skeptical of the McCanns. There were too many unanswered questions, too many gaps. The dogs had signaled something deeply troubling, and the parents were starting to feel strategic. As the forensic reports trickled in from the UK, police examined every possible scenario. They speculated Madeleine might have died accidentally in the apartment, perhaps due to sedation. That panic set in, and the abduction story was fabricated to avoid losing custody of their children or facing legal consequences. These were only theories, but they were theories the McCanns refused to entertain. Tensions escalated when the couple returned to the police station on September 6th and 7th, not as grieving parents, but now as formal suspects in their own daughter's disappearance. Kate's interview was particularly contentious. She was asked 48 direct questions about that night, about her behavior, about the dogs, about why there was no physical evidence of an abduction. To all but one, she said, "No comment." It wasn't a good look. The press back home, especially in Portugal, pounced. For many, this silence read as guilt. To the public, the McCanns had shifted from victims to villains. But Kate and Gerry didn't crumble. The very next day, they boarded a flight home to the UK with their twins. The Portuguese police watched in stunned disbelief. Their main suspects were simply allowed to leave the country. Back in England, the McCanns launched a renewed PR campaign. Surrounded by advisors, media strategists, and lawyers, they fought back. They hired top legal counsel. They gave interviews. They maintained their innocence. Still, whispers persisted. Former police officers spoke out. Portuguese detectives began leaking details to the press about the dogs, the DNA, the inconsistent statements. The narrative was changing. The public was now divided. One half saw a witch hunt, the other saw a cover-up. The idea that a parent could harm their own child is almost too horrible to accept. But it's also precisely why some people began to suspect it, because no one expected it. And as time went on, with no ransom, no leads, and no new suspects, the McCanns remained at the center of it all. They were no longer just the parents of a missing girl. They were the mystery. When Madeleine McCann disappeared on the night of May 3, 2007, she wasn't just with her parents. The McCanns were part of a tight-knit group of friends, 3 other couples, all British, all professionals, most of them doctors. They became known as the Tapas Seven. Each night, this group dined together at the Ocean Club's tapas bar, just steps from their apartments. It was a routine, casual arrangement, but one that would later become central to the investigation. According to the group, they had set up a system. Every 10 to 15 minutes, someone would leave the table and check on their sleeping children. It was meant to be safe, responsible. But police and the public quickly noticed how much depended on their word. When detectives began taking statements from the Tapas Seven, small discrepancies began to appear. People disagreed on the timing of the checks. Some weren't sure who checked when. Others described routes and observations that seemed logistically impossible. One of the most controversial came from Jane Tanner. She told police that at around 9:15 p.m., she saw a man walking briskly away from the McCann apartment carrying a small child. Bare feet, pink pajamas. She assumed it was Gerry bringing Madeleine back from somewhere. Only later did she realize he had just returned from checking the children. Her statement became a key piece of the abduction theory, but Portuguese police were skeptical. No one else at the tapas bar saw the man. A tourist walking on the same street at that time said he saw no one carrying a child. Some began to wonder, had Jane seen anything at all? And then there was the timeline problem. Kate McCann raised the alarm at 10 p.m., but some of the friends recalled panic and confusion earlier than that. Why were memories of such a dramatic moment already contradicting each other? Investigators suspected the group may have collaborated on their stories before giving statements. They were never interviewed together, and despite police requests, the Tapas Seven refused to return to Portugal for a formal reconstruction. The refusal was telling. Critics asked, if they truly had nothing to hide, why avoid helping the investigation? Defenders said the group had already been harassed by the press and feared a setup. One of the McCann's friends, Dr. David Payne, was also scrutinized separately. An early witness, a friend of Kate's, claimed she had once seen Payne make disturbing comments about Madeleine years before the holiday. Portuguese police documented the claim, but it was never substantiated. Still, it added fuel to already dangerous speculation. In the absence of hard evidence, the Tapas Seven became more than witnesses. They became part of the mystery, a group whose testimony could either prove an abduction or protect a lie. And as the weeks turned into months, none of them changed their stories. But the questions remained. Were their statements true? Were they protecting Kate and Gerry? Or were they telling the truth about a crime they never saw? Nobody really knows, and that's the problem. From the moment Madeleine McCann was reported missing, the case became a media storm. But what set it apart from so many other missing child cases wasn't just the global attention. It was the unprecedented level of media control orchestrated by her parents. Within just a few days, the McCanns had enlisted help from the highest levels of British government and public relations. Their response wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. The McCanns' first media advisor, Alex Woolfall, worked for a major crisis management firm that had handled government communications. He flew to Praia da Luz almost immediately. His presence signaled something. This wouldn't be an ordinary missing persons campaign. While Portuguese police were still searching the coastline and interviewing resort staff, the McCanns were crafting a public narrative, holding carefully managed press briefings, choosing photographs, and delivering messages that were polished, composed, and on brand. And it worked. At first, millions around the world sympathized. Donations poured into the newly formed Find Madeleine Fund, a limited company created to support the search and cover legal costs. Posters were printed in dozens of languages. News outlets gave them extensive airtime. They even met with Pope Benedict XVI, a photo op that made global headlines. But beneath the surface, the PR machine was raising eyebrows. The McCanns went on to hire Hanover, another high-level PR firm, to control media messaging back in the UK. At one point, 4 separate firms were involved in managing the family's image. When certain newspapers started to ask questions about the cadaver dogs, the DNA, or the lie detector refusals, the McCanns threatened lawsuits, and they followed through. In 2008, they won large settlements from several British tabloids, including the Daily Express and Daily Star, for publishing articles that suggested they were responsible for Madeleine's disappearance. They used the money to continue funding their campaign. But critics argued they were using litigation to suppress uncomfortable questions. Meanwhile, Portuguese police grew frustrated. While the investigation struggled under public scrutiny, the McCanns were controlling the story internationally, casting doubt on the competence of the detectives and shifting the narrative away from themselves. Even the name Find Madeleine Fund drew suspicion. It wasn't a registered charity, it had no external oversight, and yet it became the financial backbone of their search, funding lawyers, detectives, and media consultants. To some, it was a savvy effort by desperate parents. To others, it looked like damage control. Controlling the narrative, as suspicion mounted, the McCanns doubled down on media appearances. They gave interviews on Oprah, Sky News, and BBC. They wrote a book. Gerry started a blog. They emphasized one consistent message. Madeleine was taken. We had nothing to do with it. But as time went on, their media strategy began to look less like a campaign to find their daughter, and more like a campaign to protect themselves. Questions about the case weren't being answered. They were being managed. By September 2007, the McCanns were no longer just the grieving parents of a missing child. They were now official suspects in the eyes of Portuguese authorities. The shift had been gradual but deliberate. Police had grown frustrated by the inconsistencies, the refusal to answer questions, and the disturbing findings from the cadaver dogs. Then came the DNA reports. While inconclusive, they were enough to warrant suspicion. And so on September 7th, both Kate and Gerry McCann were declared arguidos, formal suspects under Portuguese law. It was a devastating blow to their public image. The very people who had pleaded with the world to help find their daughter were now the focus of the investigation. The pressure was mounting. But instead of staying to fight the allegations or help with further inquiries, the McCanns made a decision that stunned many. They left Portugal. On September 9th, just 2 days after being made suspects, Kate and Gerry boarded a flight to the UK with their twins and returned home. To their supporters, it was a justified escape from a hostile and incompetent investigation. To critics, and especially to Portuguese investigators, It was an act of retreat. Authorities were furious. They believed the McCanns had cut and run the moment the spotlight turned inward. Portuguese police publicly stated they had more questions for the couple, questions that would now go unanswered. Investigators alleged that the McCanns had been shielded by diplomatic pressure from the British government and PR teams back home. The McCanns, for their part, said they left because they felt unsafe, overwhelmed, and vilified. They claimed they had no legal obligation to stay. But even their exit from Portugal was shrouded in suspicion. Back in the UK, the McCanns resumed their campaign. They gave interviews, denied involvement, and worked to rebuild their image. The Find Madeleine Fund continued. Press coverage slowly softened again. But in Portugal, the tone was different. Local journalists and detectives believed the couple had slipped through their fingers. There were even rumors that the investigation had been deliberately weakened due to political pressure. Later, the head of the investigation, Gonçalo Amaral, would write a book alleging a massive cover-up, that Madeleine had died in the apartment, and the McCanns had faked her abduction. The McCanns sued him for defamation and spent years locked in legal battles, trying to silence the claim. But the damage was done. With their departure from Portugal, the investigation began to wither. Without access to the parents, without cooperation from key witnesses, the case went cold. And so, as the McCanns returned to their home in Leicestershire, smiling politely for the cameras with their 2 remaining children, the Portuguese authorities were left with a question that still echoes to this day. Did we just watch the truth walk away? By the time the McCanns returned to the UK in late 2007, the world had already begun to divide. The case had become more than a missing child. It was now a global controversy, split between 2 dominant theories. The abduction theory, supported by the McCanns and their media campaign, was simple. Madeleine was taken. They believed, and continue to insist, that an intruder entered through a window or unlocked patio door while the children slept. This intruder abducted Madeleine without waking the twins, without being seen, and without leaving significant evidence. Their main supporting argument was Jane Tanner's sighting of a man carrying a child, which the McCanns held up as proof of a stranger's involvement. Over time, sketches and age progression images were released, and hundreds of alleged sightings were reported from around the world, none confirmed. The abduction theory is heartbreaking. It's what most people wanted to believe, because the alternative was too disturbing to face. But for many, the details just didn't add up. Why was there no forced entry? Why were the shutters undamaged? Why did cadaver and blood dogs only alert in areas tied to the McCanns? And why did the parents refuse to fully cooperate with investigators? The second theory, favored by the original Portuguese police team, is darker. It proposes that Madeleine died in the apartment, possibly due to a tragic accident, and that Kate and Gerry McCann covered it up to protect themselves, their careers, or perhaps out of fear of losing custody of their remaining children. The signs pointed to this. Dogs alerted to the scent of a dead body in the apartment and the rental car. Kate washed Cuddle Cat, potentially eliminating forensic evidence. Both parents declined polygraph tests. Kate refused to answer 48 key police questions. The group refused to take part in a reconstruction of the night. The theory suggests that the abduction story was invented, and with the help of powerful connections, media control, and legal firepower, they maintained it. But this theory also has its weaknesses. No body has ever been found. No confession has ever been made. The DNA evidence was inconclusive. There is no direct proof of a cover-up, and so the debate continues. Over the years, the McCann case has polarized public opinion like few others. On forums, social media, and documentaries, people still argue passionately over what happened that night. Some believe the McCanns were victims of police incompetence and tabloid cruelty. Others believe they've been protected by money, influence, and a well-oiled PR machine. What remains undeniable is this: a 3-year-old child vanished. No one has been charged, and after billions of headlines, thousands of tips, and years of searching, we are no closer to the truth. In the absence of evidence, people filled in the gaps themselves, with belief, suspicion, or both. Because when answers are missing, doubt becomes its own kind of truth. More than 18 years have passed since the night of May 3, 2007. Madeleine McCann's face is still one of the most recognized in the world. Her wide eyes stare out from posters, documentaries, and news reports, forever frozen at 3 years old. But despite international investigations, millions in funding, and intense public interest, the most basic question remains unanswered. What happened to Madeleine McCann? Over the years, the case has been reopened, restructured, and re-examined. In 2011, the British government launched Operation Grange, a separate investigation by Scotland Yard. It was meant to review all evidence and work with Portuguese authorities. The cost, over £13 million to date. Operation Grange explored multiple theories, including burglary gone wrong, stranger abduction, and even human trafficking. But after all the time and resources, no one has been arrested, no one has been charged, and no body has been found. In 2020, German police named a man, Christian Bruckner, a convicted sex offender, as a new suspect. They claim to have concrete evidence that Madeleine was dead, but as of now, no formal charges have been laid. No evidence has been made public. Meanwhile, the McCanns remain in the spotlight and under the microscope. They've written books, given interviews, sued journalists, and fought in court to protect their reputation. Some still believe their story wholeheartedly. Others continue to see inconsistencies, deflections, and calculated silence. And perhaps that is what makes this case so haunting. Too much media, yet too little clarity. Too many facts, yet no hard truth. Too many voices, but no one who truly saw what happened. If Madeleine is alive, she would be in her 20s now. But no confirmed sighting has ever surfaced. No message, no remains. Just endless questions and a storm of speculation that never seems to settle. The McCanns say they live in hope, but many feel that hope has become a shield, one that keeps the past from being fully examined. Because to find the truth, we must be willing to confront all possibilities, even the ones that make us uncomfortable, even the ones we don't want to believe. So we end where we began, in a quiet resort town in Portugal, a child gone without a sound, a story filled with shadows, and a single haunting question that still echoes through every home, every headline, and every heart that followed this case. Where is Madeleine McCann?